67% of Americans believe abortion should be legal. Like a majority of Americans believe that. And if we can just remember, like, regardless of what's happening legally and what's going on with politicians, that is rarely an actual representation of reality. So first step would be just like seeing what's going on in your individual community, or like what's happening with your state laws versus everything, going on federally.
Welcome back to Open Late Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Sfandiari, and this week I have with me Ann Hodder-Shipp, who is an incredible sex and relationships educator. She's an author, and I've been following her for a long time, and I was so struck. I mean, I always love your content, but I was really struck by this idea of, modern love languages, which you detail in your book, but born out of the reason behind it is like the person who created the 5 love languages, Mr. Gary Chapman, is maybe not who we imagine him to be. And that these love languages were sort of born out of this place of heteronormativity and exclusion and these like very traditional dynamics in relationships. And so that's a mouthful, but I wanted my listeners to know right away what we're getting into today. But Anne, welcome to Open Late Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this conversation because I've personally used these love languages and still do. I couldn't wait to tell my therapist because she's very progressive and modern and into all the things and sex positive. Obviously, she is a therapist to a open marriage couple of 9 years. And I told her, and she was like, wait, what? Because we talk about the love languages in therapy. And I'm like, yeah, we just went over it maybe 2 months ago, checking in and seeing like where we were at with Pasha and I. And so I'm so curious how you sort of found this out in the first place. Just like research and you happened upon it.
What almost makes it worse is that it doesn't require a whole lot of deep digging, but because he's been open about his beliefs, but in like strategic places. So it's not necessarily buried, but it's very strategically, I'm not going to make any assumptions, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if it was strategically kept in certain areas so that people like us wouldn't necessarily stumble upon what's true about him and his intentions. But I don't know what year it was, but like I love the concept of love languages, and apology languages was cool. I had no reason to feel skeptical or doubtful of anything. It was like cool, a tool to use. And I would use it in groups I was running in rehabs with recently sober adults and sometimes teenagers as just a way to kind of like try to conceptualize a relatively broad but very impactful feeling like love. Yeah. And see like what does it mean to each individual person. And here's this like quiz I can print out, and it's relatively doable regardless of your reading comprehension level. So I found ways to use it, but as I was using it, I would notice little things that were like, I'm just going to tweak this. And so I would just reframe it, or I'd give like a little bit of a heads up about like some phrasing that they might see, or I would offer a little bit of like a reframe on certain relationship, I don't know, dynamics or examples of love that would be in the quiz. And I was just doing that for years and just like in real time kind of rewriting it to better suit what I really wanted my clients to kind of work with. And then in the sex ed community, we have this kind of like online community where for a time, we could ask each other questions or share information. And I remember something coming up about, hey, did y'all know the person who wrote the 5 love languages is a homophobe? And I was like, ruh-roh, what? Like send all the links, and saw the links. And it's not necessarily, it's like, in my opinion, almost a more fucked up kind of homophobia, because it's like, I love them anyway, but that's an abomination. That's their choice. I choose to love them, and also they're going to go to hell and they can't hang with us at our table in heaven, that kind of bullshit. And not secretive about it. It's like if you go online, you can see, maybe it's been taken down now, but like we've got screenshots. And anyway, it just kind of snowballed from there up around like, oh, this is actually like, let's think more about this. And then we found out, again, it didn't take a lot of research. It was just kind of like, oh, we trusted this. We gave this person the benefit of the doubt, but also look what we're finding. He's just a Christian minister. He's called himself a marriage counselor ever since he just started to counsel hetero couples because he was the priest there. And he was like, I'm a marriage counselor now. And so I kind of call him a cosplayer, a marriage counselor cosplayer. So it's all just made up stuff coming from just Christian white guy intentions and background. Like that's all his qualifications, which in my opinion means he's got none.
Yeah.
But never been transparent about it. That's what's to me incredibly shifty.
Yeah. Well, I love that we're finding out because it's a cause for people to really. So, first of all, if you've never heard of the love languages, and we kind of jumped right in here, but let me just like frame this for listeners. I'm sure most people have, but the 5 love languages or whatever it is, it's a quiz, as Anne said, that you can take and really understand. It's, one of those like, let me understand myself better and my partner and the way that we sort of relate and communicate. What's your style of showing love and receiving love? So there's like 2 ways to sort of think about it or look at it, and they are acts of service, right? Gifts.
Yep, receiving gifts specifically.
Yeah. Physical touch, quality time with
and acts of service. Did you already say that one?
I think I did.
This is like naming the 7 dwarfs where you can never remember the 7th one. Oh my God. It's like not that complicated.
Yeah, but you guys get the point.
Anyway, yes.
So it's these, things, and you can take the quiz in both ways. Which way do I show my love to my partner? Which ways do I prefer to receive it? A lot of times you'll find they're not the same. And a lot of times you'll find that you and your partner have very different styles of giving and receiving, or at least that's been my experience with most of my relationships.
Words of affirmation.
Words of affirmation. That's right. Oh my God. That's right.
That's the 7th dwarf.
That's Pasha's, was always his number one. And it's so funny. I don't want to derail this whole conversation, but I saw a really funny meme the other day that was like, is acts of service really your love language, or are you just the firstborn daughter in your family? And I was like, oh, I feel attacked and seen all at the same time. But so this is what we're talking about here. And, when we uncover this, as I did through your amazing reel and just all of the content that you create, I was like, holy shit, this is a cause for me to re-examine what I've always used as a tool, which is not a bad thing. It's helped us in some ways. Like, polarity in relationships is not a terrible thing. It really helps marriage stay in a great lane in some ways. But then we find that it's limited. And I love what you've done. I mean, in your book, Speaking from the Heart, which I'm halfway through because right when I saw that was the reason that I got it, now dives into 18 languages for modern love. So I'd love to kind of dive into that and what your work has been, because I know you do a lot of education around sex and relationships, but in this realm specifically. So
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, if the main issue, aside from stuff we've talked about, right, like the source is a problematic source, the concept of thinking about feelings as a communication tool or using that as a framework to better understand how you experience certain feelings and what actions and words help that feeling come about, that's not his idea, right? It's something that I think is used, it may be a CBT kind of tool, like not cock and ball torture, but like behavioral therapy. And so absolutely that concept is so great. The issue with among the many of taking something like love and categorizing it into just 5 neat and tidy categories is it's just too broad still. And one of the many reasons why the ebook was even written, it wasn't like I was setting out to do this thing at all. It was just as I was working with my clients, I would see how they would interpret the overly broad stuff. And I'd be like, oh no, that's not what that means at all. Okay, interesting. And all of that informed me to a point where I was like, all right, there's no alternative to the love languages. my colleagues and I would occasionally write about, like, does anyone have one yet? Like, is there one yet that you know of? So I was like, I'm going to make a pamphlet or like a infographic, and I'm just going to show the various, what to me feel like just more specific languages, ways to communicate or receive love, and like just make it a thing and a tool we could all use. And as I was just listing out the things that had been kind of brewing for several years, there were like maybe 23 examples that I felt really worked. And I worked with, some colleagues and some friends, and it kind of cut it to about 18. But the real takeaway, there's two. The first one is very different from Chapman's version. I am not telling you that these are the 18 and the only 18. I am saying here are 18, not because you need to memorize them, but because love is fucking nuanced as hell, and you need more than five, and you need more than 18. This will get you going. And if you are like, well, this other thing, maybe this could be the 19th, write it down. It's your it's your 19th. It's like, I don't own this idea of like what the correct way is, what the correct languages are or aren't. It's just like, I'm going to take this too broad thing for something that we are already totally squirrely about because we get a horrendous education about what love is, package it with way more nuance and options, and then center platonic love, decenter romance, and all of the things associated, like heterosexual marriage and all that kind of stuff, and just make it about what is love to you without these conditions of romance and will this lead to marriage and relationship hierarchy around, no, my partner is number one and then my friends, all of that shit that keeps us in really stuck, tight, inflexible places that rarely really work universally for people. It works for some, but it's treated as though it's the universal experience of love and like the right way to seek out love. And it also, in turn, by completely just romanticizing love and as a concept, it removes all of these other sources of love that we literally are surrounded by all the time, makes us love starved, thinking that we can only get it from one source. And then we're just like tapped off from all of these other things. And it's just, I don't know, it just feels so, it's what a lonely way to be. And so it was like really just, yeah, thinking not just here are some love languages, but like, what does it feel like to you when you feel loved? It's so subjective. So, like, what are the emotions you can tag to it? And then where else in your life do you feel those feels? And is it possible those are additional sources of these love feelings for you? And can we diversify a tad solely for the fact that you deserve access to this way more than you might have now?
Yeah. Wow, thank you so much for sharing, because I think it's so important to highlight what you're saying about taking the romantic love out of it and sort of centralizing the platonic. Um, Obviously, huge fan, being, a polyamorous person who finds so much of my love source in my platonic relationships and my friendships, because over the years I've been able to like eliminate that barrier of like separateness from those people, because I've been able to share my love so much more freely. And I think that's like a huge beauty in non-monogamy. But now, as I'm finding, having this podcast, so many of my listeners are monogamous, and like so happy to hear what I'm sharing, because it's really about taking like the focus or the goal off of this one great, romantic love, which is this like, sort of unattainable thing that we've all been sold. But I appreciate this because, you molding this sort of new like option like this way is so expansive for people, and it's going to not only bring more connection probably into their, romantic love, into their relationship or relationships with their partners, but having them look at all these other relationships they can examine where they can expand and maximize from their parents, from their children, from their sisters and brothers, and whatever, their community. And that's really what the world needs more of, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and also I'll even add on to that, like in addition to recognizing more love sources. Some of the work is also recognizing what has presumed to be a love source isn't actually giving you what you register as love. And you've been receiving it because it made sense. But now that you have better context around, like, maybe it, like, could this be a thing that's keeping me feeling slightly disconnected from this person? Or is this a thing that is keeping me from feeling fully safe with them or feeling even fully respected or seen by them? Because I've actually just been taking what I'm receiving, and because it's from like a parent, for example, it's automatically just labeled as a love expression, when really it could actually be landing as, I don't see you as a person, or I don't think you're doing well enough, or I know better than you, or who knows what. And that's not the intention of the person, it's just how it's landing on the recipient. That's what matters the most. And so it can really help you not only diversify, but then just getting clear on, like, who are my real sources, and are there some folks who might need some new information about me, about what I do need or don't need, and do they even need that info? Is it worth telling them? It might not be, and that's totally fine. But it's just additional, like, it just feels even more empowering because it's like both sides of the coin.
Right. And then we get into that really responsible place. You can take that information and do what you want with it, which I think is so, well, at least in my experience, I'm only 38, or, I'm 38. I'm an younger, I don't know, I'm an older millennial.
Me too. I'm 38.
Yeah. And so it's like the concept of sharing, like getting clear on my needs and desires and then sharing them with another human is still new. Like I've only been doing it the last maybe 6-7 years. And I think it's new for so many people. Probably even hearing this, you might be thinking like, oh, like I would take this information to maybe my best friend and say, this is like something about me that would, I realize I feel really good when this happens, or, and then getting inquisitive, like, what is this for you? Like, how do you really feel the most connected to me or feel loved or whatever? And I just imagine how my mind's been blown over the last couple of years, like how many people will, yeah, just expand and feel supported by having this. Because if we backtrack to the 5 love languages, and I don't want to skip over this because I think it's important. Maybe I jumped in quickly. I always do. But I would love for you to share, at least from your point of view, like what is limited about using them now, knowing what you know. And I mean, the first time I saw your post, I was like, oh, that makes like acts of service. Obviously, this is, now that I'm thinking about it, it makes so much sense that this would be like more a woman's role from this man's point of view, and then I went down the rabbit hole of like, and gifting. And of course that I brought my own judgment to it. And I'm like, when I first took it, I remember being like, oh, I don't care about gifts because I'm not that kind of girl. Right?
Number one judgment of all of my clients is, please don't make mine gifts because that's superficial and bullshit. That's what they would do.
I'm glad I'm not alone, because that is exactly what I thought. And now that I'm older and really safe and secure in my marriage, I'm like, yeah, I want gifts. Gifts from everybody. Bring me the gifts.
For sure.
But because I've grown out of that, like really, people pleasing ingenue version of myself that was raised, by a mother who wanted me to be a good girl and be respected and X, Y, and Z, like in my family, and like kiss every relative when they walk in the door. Which isn't the worst thing, but it's also not the best thing. So I'd love to hear why using these 5 is so limited. And, we don't have to go into like why they're bad and wrong, but also like how it could actually probably be harmful for people to put themselves into these boxes.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is, like, by no means do I think anything is just like bad or wrong, in part because, just for clarity, I don't necessarily think you think I think this, but like, we do live in a world, in a culture that loves binaries. It's either good or bad, or it's right or wrong, or whatever. And the binary doesn't work with humans. It's like robots and computers for sure. Humans, fuck no, it doesn't work. It's like square peg beyond a round hole. Like, it just doesn't work. And we keep trying to like force it. So if any of these 5 benefit anybody, like, fuck yeah, I want you to have transparency and all the info so that when you use it, you are using it as an informed person. Like you have informed consent to utilize this tool instead of being what, in my opinion, feels like selective info in order to manipulate people to feel really safe and comfortable. Oh, it's from a marriage counselor. Okay. Oh, he's been married for this long. All right. And like this book is 30 years old. It's got to be good. And meanwhile, it's really just, to me, it feels like a great, helpful idea, but used for propaganda. So, for example, one of the issues, like you brought up with the gift giving, from my perspective, love, again, it's so nuanced and so subjective. It means so many different things to different people. How on earth could you take that and make 5 categories and that's it? My analogy I use in the book and the workbook is that would be, as to me, as logical as saying there are only 5 languages in the entire world. All the other ones are extras. Those dialects don't count, which of course is also very like colonial, like colonizing white supremacy. Like it really is like fascinating patriarchy, white supremacy, man, religious pastor making this book, telling everybody these are the only 5. And he actively rejects other people's suggestions. This has been recorded. Like he denies dialects matter. It's just like, holy moly, the jokes write themselves. And also, I'm so sad. Like, how did, like, this has been how it is for 30 years with no questioning, no challenging. And of course, the media never brings up any of the reality. They think that this is just like such a cute old man who's 80 now. And oh, it's just, I don't know. It's upsetting. Anyway, slight tangent, but I want people to just know what they're working with. So for example, acts of service and receiving gifts, very gendered, for sure. It doesn't mean it has to be at all. The lens through which it's described matters, and that lens is heterosexual, heteronormative, cisgender, cisnormative. That relationships that can bring marriage and result in marriage are the ones. Those are the ones that matter the most, and that's where love exists. It's either your parents and family or the person you are going to legally bind yourself to forever. Anything extra, I don't know, maybe it's micro cheating. Like all of that toxic monogamy garbage. So, like your experience, when my clients would be like, why is you can't buy me love? Like gift giving, that's bullshit. And then sometimes they'd take the quiz and they would feel so much shame if they got numbers, or other people would make fun of them in the group if they got high numbers for receiving gifts, as if it was a bad thing. And I'd literally have to sit there and say, all right, let's talk about what a gift is. Fancy car? Sure. What if I make you a card? Is that a gift? What if I'm at Trader Joe's and I see they have a sale on your favorite candy bar, so I get 2 of them for you? Does that count even though it only costs $2? Like, what is it about your relationship to gifts that means I spend a lot and it's wrapped and it's a big deal? What about gifting your time? What about when you have 9 to 5 and you have like 10 kids to take care of and you have no time for yourself, but you set aside your one day off so that you have the afternoon to have lunch with this person who matters to you? That's a goddamn gift. It's also quality time. And if you make the food or buy the food, I would say it's also an act of service. Like there's so much overlap, but at its root, that's a fucking gift. Why doesn't that count to you? And maybe it does, and you didn't even realize that it could, because it was not outlined like that for you in this very simplified quiz. Other issues like acts of service became, I would see, I will say I had a lot of misogynists in my groups, a lot of angry white guys. They were all over the place. And so a lot of in addition to the gift giving stuff, the acts of service thing was like almost becoming this manipulation thing where like, she needs to do this shit for me because that's what makes me feel loved. And if she won't, you don't love me, and it was like, holy fucking shit, fuck. Like this is starting to go into like consent territory, right? Like, ugh. And then the physical touch thing, also super problematic because our culture very much sexualizes all touch, unless it comes from a parent or a doctor, but everything else is sexual. And even still, some people will sexualize a doctor's touch. They think people go to the gynecologist because it feels good. But I digress. Lack of sex ed, among other things. So they would talk about physical touch like, okay, this is a means to an end. So physical touch is a love language for me because it turns me on and I can get laid. So people would make jokes about like giving each other massages because it's your love language, as though if I start speaking your love language to you, you're going to get turned on and then fuck me. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my. But thank God I was witnessing this in real time because I was like, nope, 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 nope. And I would like handle it. But I was realizing if this is happening so frequently in these small groups of adults, how there is no way misinterpretations like this, maybe not the same ones, but like misinterpretations have got to be happening all over the fucking place. And among the misinterpretations, including those fucked up ones, my judgment, and I'm judging them, own it, is the idea that you can only be one, and that the secret to long lasting romantic love is you find a partner who speaks yours. And if you don't, red flag, it's never going to work. When in actuality, it's kind of like the assumption that you need to find someone who wants as much sex as you do, and then everything will be fine. When in reality, it's like, I'm sorry, desire and love are emotions. That would be as logical as like, I'm going to find someone who is happy and only happy 24/7 until they die. Let's go find the person. Let's go find them.
Where are they?
They're nowhere. Those are robots.
What state is the most happy people? Like, do the most happy people live in?
And like that's the thing. It's like, okay, if these are the things that I am being told or that I'm interpreting are like the ways to kind of reduce the risk of pain, which many of us are trying to avoid that, then like, yeah, we're going to not only live in the existing constrictive rules, but then we're going to make new ones based on what makes sense to us. And even though it's funny that like we can laugh at it now, like if you think this is the way to go, you would find the state with the happiest people and you'd go to the state capitol and then you'd start looking up who's a lawyer here or like, all of those different checkbox rules because you think maybe I've gamed the system thanks to this five love language idea. When in reality, you are down some weird rabbit hole that is not going to end in what you're wanting it to. And disappointment and letdown is such a huge part of so many people's relationship experiences because of those initial expectations and seeking something specific instead of letting people just be as they are. And then you kind of recognize like, oh, interesting, this is who this person is and that person. And like, I think I want to be their friend because we like the same band, but I'm never going to have a sleepover with them because I don't like their house or it's, I don't like whatever. Like you have all these like, you just learn things and then you find out who's going to work for you for certain things and who's not for certain things. And then if you also find one of them hot and you want to like jump their bones, or you think maybe I do want to get married, maybe they would work out. Like if that realization would develop as a result of letting people show you who they are consistently, while also making space for the fact that they're going to become 10 or 15 different versions of themselves throughout their adulthood. And that also is okay. And you need to be prepared for that just as much. I know that was like a really long answer, but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think, everything that you're sharing is like speaking to the fact that we're all on a journey, obviously, and we live this life and like expecting us to stay one version of ourselves without having an evolution is a lot what like the idea of like marriage and finding the one and like having this happily ever after speaks to, but that's just not the way that we live for many of us. It might work for some, but most of us are looking for, lives where we can reinvent ourselves and have people in and around us that, share that love for either evolution. And I know, I'm speaking to a lot of my listeners here. Maybe not everybody on the planet. Some people marry and they're like, I want my wife to stay the same exact person forever and ever. And
they want it.
Yeah. Then there's the joke that women are always trying to like get the men to change. Men are trying to get women to stay the same, which is like a joke that I heard a lot in my community growing up. But yeah, I love what you're sharing because it's speaking to like, okay, how can we support each other to grow and change and meet all these new versions of ourselves as we do that? And your work provides a lot of space for that. I'd love to know, like, what got you so like passionate about educating people around sexuality and relationships. Let's go into your story a bit.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's all rooted basically in the fact that I experienced different forms of less obvious neglect when I was younger. So I was very much on my own for a variety of things, including like information about regular old existing in the world. Like how do you do this? How do you wash your hair? How do you, I don't know, like little things that um I don't remember getting like a whole lot of lessons on, and just kind of like figuring it out as made sense to me. And when I want to say maybe 8, I'm not exactly sure, but I had like a total accidental orgasm, and I was like, what is that? And I, to the point where I was so overwhelmed, I just like stopped doing what I was doing. I was like, what is happening? And then I was like desperate to make it come back. So I was like, where did it go? It was just like, so, I mean, when you think about it, like, oh, cute, like what an endearing perspective on what actually is this other thing that will mean so much more to you at some point in the future. And so I was like, what is that? Tell me all the things. Because to me, I found safety in info so I could understand something. If I could understand it or know how to work with it, it was like, okay, there's a sense of safety here, because it very much was like a me, myself, and I kind of a existence. And so this was, of course, pre-internet. So I would spend a lot of time in the library looking at like old musty books and old editions of Cosmopolitan and Glamour that were in like the back of the library. And I would just read anything that I could while thinking I was sneaky about it. And, fast forward, I was in journalism school. So it was very much like informing people about stuff that's going on. And the skill set was something that might be a big thing, and you find a way to like make it just readable to a regular person. And even still was very curious about like gender and sexuality, but it was like not an official thing to study yet. Like you could do a sociology minor, which I did, but there was no like gender studies. There was men's studies and women's studies and all these other cultural explorations. And by the time I graduated, I was already kind of like hyper aware of fairness and unfairness and discrimination, and like why is why is it this way? Someone literally just made it this way. It's not like it needs to be this way. That person made it this, like just very quickly I was like seeing behind all the curtains. And that gave me a sense of like, I don't know, drive, because I'm like, that's fucked. I want everyone to know that. Everyone should know that. I mean, it shouldn't be this hard to find out what's true.
Right.
And about anything. And the sex and sexuality focus was just like semi-accidental, because my second journalism job was being a copy editor at a magazine that covered the adult industry. And so if I hadn't had that job, I 100% would have gone into the sexuality world in some way anyway, because I was just so like interested and wanted to know, and I knew people wanted to know stuff. So I was like, I'll be that person who can find the info. And it felt like an act of service. It felt like a purpose. And over time, this is like way longer than I would normally even answer this question, but
I'm here for it.
even more how specifically with sex and sexuality, not only it's not just like, oh, the education isn't as good as it should be or could be, and everyone's doing their best. It's like, oh no, this is on purpose. This information is like left out on purpose because they know what it does and that works for them, capital T. It's the people in power. And it's not just politicians. It's anyone who has a position of power to make the decisions for the next people. So it's like, sure, Congress, senators, president, yada yada, but like school board presidents, the superintendent, the teacher, your parents and caregivers, your babysitter, whoever is in charge of like who could be a gatekeeper between you and info, they're all making active decisions, whether they realize it or not, that all have the same intent. if I give this to you, I'm afraid of what it might do for you in terms of, honestly, autonomy. And that makes me uncomfortable. Also, I didn't have that. So I'm just going to hold it back and wait until you're older.
Yeah.
And so our entire sex ed system is built around, we're going to talk about sex by talking about don't have it. And that misinformed, uninformed public then become just like totally disconnected to themselves and each other, and fill in those blanks with whatever makes sense to them, or info they were able to find that is also just propaganda and not true, including, gender stuff and what your relationships are supposed to look like. And then everyone is walking around just like winging it, trial and error, thinking that they figured it out. I mean, it reminds me kind of, I guess, analogous to the childhood thing where it's like we're on our own, so I'm gonna just like try to figure it out on my own, and then I think it made sense, and until it stops making sense, and then I'll try to learn something different and fill in those blanks then. And um, meanwhile, the power that finding out what's actually true about your feelings and your body beyond sex and sexuality, but even just like reconciling with your skin suit you didn't choose. Once you got to see like what's true about all this stuff, so much of the fear and uncertainty slowly starts to melt. It takes some time because there's like a grieving process along with an unlearning process, but it's so much easier to exist, especially in the container we're all forced to exist in right now. It just becomes so much easier to exist once you know what's really real. Basically, it's like my job is making sure everybody not only knows the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, but can see it on their own, so that maybe they can help the next person or their friend see the emperor is not wearing any fucking clothes. And it's just in addition to all of that, like I know that access to this information about what's true changes lives and in some cases saves them. I work with a lot of queer and trans teens. And for example, as soon as, I had a trans guy who, once he found out that the penis and the clitoris are the same deal, they're just like put together differently with a different shape. He was like, so, like, I guess, so like a trans guy has a dick, like technically, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know all kinds of trans guys who talk about the dick in their pants. And it's sure it labeled the clitoris, but like you call it whatever the fuck you want. It's not that different. His mind was just fucking blown. And like knowing now what that's even doing for him around like his own dysmorphia and dysphoria around the skin suit he doesn't want, and how he desperately wants to change. It's like, all right, while I wait to potentially change this, I still technically I've got a dick, so like, cool. I don't need to be so separate from it or disconnected from it. So yeah, again, like such a broad answer to that question, but it comes down to like it doesn't need to be this way,
Right.
and I want to help other people realize that, so that I don't know, it becomes they can just find it a little bit easier to exist in their skin and alongside other people's skin.
Yeah. I mean, our sexuality is like so foundational to our nature. Like as humans, I think it's probably the most important thing for many of us because it's our life force. And so when we don't have this connection to it and we don't feel safe in it, or we don't love it about ourselves, I think it's like disruptive to every area of our lives. And it's like, it's really challenging to find happiness or joy or peace if you're not in line or in alignment or like in acceptance of that. And yeah, when we're born into a system that literally thrives on keeping us separate from that, the work that you're doing is just like, it's a godsend for many.
It's true. I mean, it's like, imagine, we don't have to imagine this, but when you're actively being told constantly that who you feel you are, how you feel about yourself and the world, the feelings that are coming up whether you want them to or not, the behaviors you're engaging in because you're either curious or it feels nice or you're wanting to learn or you're acting on a feeling, being told that all those things are not only wrong but could actually have the most detrimental consequence of all, that you like spend eternity once you die in fiery pits away from your loved ones, being poked by fucking demons all day. Like, that, what a horrible way to live, because you think there's something inherently wrong with you because you're not asking for these feelings to happen. You didn't ask for the things on your chest or the thing dangling between your legs. They're there and you're experiencing them in a certain way, and it's the opposite of what all of the people in charge of you are saying is correct and good and moral and right and all the things. And so, like, how on earth can you, there's no other way to exist except like stumbling along feeling like shit and ashamed and guilty all the time.
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's what's wild to me is like we don't often, I think, come to grips with the fact that so much of this is born out of just over sexualizing our sexuality, like, and you know, our bodies, and that also stems from all the people in charge. So I mean, which is like a scary rabbit hole that we're not going to go down in this episode, but I think it's like worth saying. It's like because I'm non-monogamous, I get this a lot where, like, you know, being queer, being like, I came out as bisexual before I really understood like the full nature of my queerness, and being a non-monogamous woman, it's like you're very over sexualized. So anytime I talk about it, people just want to talk about sex, and it's like, wait a minute, there's like a million other dimensions and layers to what this is. And I think that's also what happens here. It's like everything you're saying about someone's body and their feelings and the way they want to express maybe has 15 other aspects of it that we could talk about and help people understand about themselves before we would even get to something actually like sexual in nature, of like, you know, like making love or like having sex or like whatever, whether it's solo or partnered. So I think that's a huge issue too, is like that the people in power or in charge see everything as sexual in nature, because that's probably what they're A, most afraid of, and B, trying to control the most, or for worse or sadder reasons, like have some kind of, you know, deviant nature too. Is that, am I going way on a tangent?
No,
Or
not at all. I mean, the unfortunate reality, whether people like it or not, is like sex is incredibly political, not because we want it to be, because it was made political by all these people. It's not only their own beliefs they're imposing, and they, you know, are trying to like have trickle down in all of the layers of control and power that we coexist with. It's also, it's a hot button issue. It is a pearl clutching issue. So it's also a manipulation tool where if you make something sexual that isn't, you get people paying attention more, including what about the children? That's what we're seeing with just any type of trans affirming healthcare, talking about being trans or queer in school. It's all just sexualizing not being heterosexual, and that gets to be the reason we can remove it. So it's more insidious even than just they're afraid of it and it's a power tool. It's like, oh, and also it facilitates their big intention, which ultimately, even the most supposedly God-fearing politician, at the end of the day, their number one goal is not serve God, it's keep my power and get more of it. And also money, but money is power in capitalism, right? And so they'll do whatever needs to be done, and they've got all the support because everyone else they work with has the same goal. And so it bringing sex and sexuality into things that don't have a real connection to it, and then also taking things that are about sex and sexuality and just making it all about like sex and porn and triple X and all this stuff that they think is wrong. It's all, yeah, it's all a means to that end. And I think in addition, like the sexualization thing is definitely key, including like sex ed is sexualized, not just like the queer and trans education that's being completely, you know, obliterated and demonized, but and the educators being doxxed and having their lives completely ruined because they are happen to be not hetero or not cis and openly so as a teacher anyway. um it makes it impossible to like have a conversation about what sex ed needs to look like in schools, because people think sex ed means you're teaching 8-year-olds to have anal. It's like, oh my God. If the most frustrating part is like, you brought that into this conversation. That's what you think this is. Here's a mirror. Do some work. That's kind of fucked up. Meanwhile, we're going to do what we actually are doing in sex ed, which is not teaching 8-year-olds to have anal. And anyone who does think that that's true needs to share that mirror with you, because that's where we get all these laws around sex ed surrounding, or sex ed centered on abstinence, because the thought is like, well, sex ed is dicks and vaginas and orgasms, and they're too young for that. And also, if they learn about it, they'll do it. And we have so much data that shows that's not actually what happens when you provide info. We actually have data to the contrary. And the data, this fear and this bullshit and propaganda is so powerful that it just completely, the data doesn't matter. It obliterates the data as if it didn't exist.
Mm. I'd actually love to hear from you, because I mean, this isn't like research, and I love to read books. I'm not very quick at it, but research has never been my thing. But I'm always fascinated by, stats and things when I hear it. And I kind of want to, let's take this on an upswing, right? What's going well? What are you excited about? I mean, obviously your work and the things that you do, and I'm grateful that you spoke to what you are seeing with like some of your clients and how powerful it is. So where are we headed in this sort of realm? Because you said you're like in a community of other sex educators. I'm sure you guys have a chat, whatever it looks like, but what's working, what's happening, what's moving in the right direction? What can people listening like get involved in?
So as always, like I'm always like very transparent and honest, right? It is a hard time to try to focus or find the upswings, because there's a lot of really scary, sad stuff happening just right now in the United States with regard to autonomy. But the reality is there is, 67% of Americans believe abortion should be legal. Like a majority of Americans believe that. And if we can just remember, like, regardless of what's happening legally and what's going on with politicians, that is rarely an actual representation of reality. So, first step would be just like seeing what's going on in your individual community, or like what's happening with your state laws versus everything going on federally, just to see, like, that might be a better picture if you're trying to see what the status of certain things are. When it comes to information, there is more like transparent, true, bias aware information about sex and sexuality and desire and relationships than ever before. And it's not always easy because there's a lot to sift through, and it is overwhelming. It's valid if it is, do it anyway, because you will find it. And asking people you trust for recommendations can help you sort of streamline the process. But you definitely can do the unlearning process. Start it on your own. You don't have to do anything huge and big. You can start by even finding like one book that seems to be the most recommended by people that you trust, or the podcasters you like, or whatever, and start there, because the upswing there is that you are in charge 100%. No one can tell you what to do. There are no rules unless you impose them on yourself. And if you do, look at them. Where do they come from? Are they even yours? And then once you finish that book, you get to see, how did it feel? How do I even feel about this information? What did it challenge? And then it's like, what am I hungry for next? And paying attention to how you feel mind body connected, like what comes up for you when you hear about things or talk about things or read about things, and maybe even write those things down so that you have context for times where you might feel, I don't know, stressed or hopeless, or like what is going on with the world. You can kind of remind yourself, like, okay, these are the things that really drive me. I want to learn more about this. And maybe even to the point where you might want to take it to a level. This is what something I'm seeing with my Everyone Deserves Sex Ed organization. People are going from that place of passion and care to, I want to learn how to do my part. I want to learn how to teach this. I want to learn how to talk about this in this way so I can do my little incremental chipping away myself along with my, my colleagues, my fellow comrades. And so like there are also trainings out there that can really help you ground into that reality and that truth that you're starting to expose yourself to with what you're reading or listening to. And that's also very empowering. And the nice side effect is the more that people are taking even trainings like that or joining communities like that, you are finding other people who have the same drive as you. So it doesn't feel as alone. And you might actually make some really fantastic friends and people you can talk about love languages with, right? So I know that was like a very like on a micro level, these are things you can do, but I'm like that is stuff I'm witnessing people doing as well.
Yeah.
It's like the incremental micro like individual things are making a big difference because focusing on just the macro is upsetting and very overwhelming and can
Very
kind of
overwhelming.
feel,
Yeah.
hopeless a little.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think it's speaking to the micro is always the best because it's like these small sustainable things that we can do, and these choices that we can make just for ourselves, and then that bleeds into our own families, right? And then, just because we start doing it, we act and live and respond in different ways, and then people sort of pay attention to that. And then hopefully it's like, I mean, one to one is like the best way to really do anything because we all focus on the big picture, but it's not like we're all spending time with, the school board and the politicians and anything like that. We like live in our lives. Like that affects our lives so much, but at the same time, not really our everyday. So that's maybe an unpopular opinion. Everyone's like, oh, it all matters so much. And of course it does. Like there are laws that change all the time that take away our rights for sure. But is like, what am I doing, 300 days out of the year where that's not? And it's just what I do in my daily life with my family that matters. So I appreciate you speaking to that. I just took a course and it's terrible because I actually don't even remember the woman's name, and I'll link it in the show notes. But it was essentially called like, maybe you know her, Take Back the Speculum.
Ooh, what's her name?
Take Back the Speculum. I don't know actually.
You
That's
know,
why I'm saying
okay.
this is terrible. I'll edit it
That's okay.
in.
I'll
I'm
look it
going to
up.
put it in the show notes. But it was literally a workshop on Saturday morning. There were only 8 women there. It was on Zoom, and we literally got out mirrors, and she retaught us our anatomy and how to give ourselves an exam if we wanted to. And like there were women who actually had their own speculums, and I was like, I can buy my own speculum. Like,
Sure can.
I don't have a cervix anymore, but I want one. And it was just wild to think like that was so foreign to me to think I could give myself my own exam. But we can and we should. And it's in classes like that I'm forever changing my perspective on my body. Like who if I had that, and this is the first time I've thought about this, I'm gonna say it on the podcast, but like if I was doing that in my 20s, maybe I wouldn't have ended up getting a hysterectomy, we are, yeah, I mean, it goes back to us being just so separate from our bodies and so disempowered when it comes to like knowing what's going on and what's happening. So, yeah, I'm gonna have to find her name and I'll share it with you.
Please do.
But it's in the little things like that. And then like if I have daughters, I will raise them to know themselves, and if I have sons, I'll have them be teaching them in a different way about their bodies, about women's bodies, about everybody's bodies. So like because I'm about to have kids and I'm already like, oh, I'm gonna have to talk to my kids about sex one day because no one talked to me about it. So I appreciate this and the work that you do. We've gotten so far away from speaking from the heart, but
It's fine. All of my work is overlapped. You know what I mean? Like it's all for the same, yeah, with the same intent. And
well, because yeah, imagine like it's really hard to speak from the heart and ask for what you want and to really even know what your desires are if you're not in connection with your body.
and if you've been told that you're not allowed to, permission is a big part of this whole process too. So I think, a big part of sex ed is actually talking about your feelings. And a lot of people don't register that. But your gender and your sexual orientation are all based on feelings as well. So like feelings are a big part. And love and all of the feelings associated with love are a huge part of existing. And so that is a part of sex ed, like what does love mean to you, regardless of whether there's a penis around or there's condoms or you're planning on, having a first time sexual experience. Like that's fine, but like we're not even there yet. We're building a foundation here first to talk about like what are feelings, what are yours, what do they mean to you, like what brings this feeling your way, what makes this feeling come up for you, and what can we do to make space for the reality that you're going to have a lot of different feelings, sometimes contradictory ones at the same time, and like how can we prepare you and normalize that so that when they happen you don't think that you're like some sort of broken anomaly, and instead you're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what they said was going to happen. All right. And it doesn't have to be such a terrifying, panicky experience when you start to notice how much of yourself you don't have control over. And even in addition, gosh, there was something else that you had said that reminded me of something, but just like knowing that, yeah, you have permission to even want to know this stuff, let alone feel how you feel. But back to what you're saying around like, going to your own trainings or realizing like what's actually possible now and having kids and what that could look like. The best sex ed and feelings education and relationship education is just you existing, because young people, whether you're their parent or caregiver or not, like they watch everyone and they're like, all right, interesting. And they're not doing this on purpose and intentionally with a notebook, right? But they're like, all right, so when this happens, they cry. When I do this, they get mad. All right, I don't like it when they're mad because I don't get dessert and I feel like I'm a bad kid and I get punished. So like it's just a lot of just like black and white up and like just binary thinking because that's where their head goes. But that is the best way to talk about and teach about things like bodily autonomy and body neutrality and respect and consent and all this kind of stuff, just by demonstrating it, by being you and acting and behaving in accordance with what is the most, I don't know, affirming way to exist. So whether or not you have these like official conversations about sex, you're still already like giving them an education without even necessarily realizing it. And the sex conversations end up maybe looking and feeling way different than you expect them to, including it may be as simple as you're going to cringe when I want to try to talk to you about this stuff. I had a shitty education, so I don't even think I'm qualified to teach you. I respect you too much. So here's a stack of books that my people recommended to me. I'll never check what's missing. Go to town. And like starting that way, you know? And then you get to the conversation ends up being like, you're not a sex educator teaching your kid. You're like, let's talk about what you read and what came up for you. And let me see if I can find answers to the questions you have, because I don't know the answers either and we can learn together. So it ends up kind of being less of this weird, like very patriarchal, like, I know everything. I'm going to pass down my knowledge to you, my offspring. Um, that's also just as fictional as like the one, and all that kind of romance relationship stuff.
I got chills actually when you said the stack of books and like passing it on, and for me that's always like a full body yes of like, oh, that makes so much sense, and or I can see myself doing that and sharing in that. That's my favorite thing is like, I don't know, because I had to know everything growing up, or at least I felt like I did, and so it's been a really nice surrender in my like, in this last 5 years to be like, I actually don't know, and it's great that I don't, and I'm not going to get in trouble.
No, it's a powerful answer. I think it is the most powerful thing you could say to someone is, I don't know, let's find out, or I have no idea. I'm going to find out someone who does know. And so it's never like a brick wall of like, I don't know, and you're never going to know either. It's like, I don't know, I'm curious too. Or I'm not curious, but I respect your curiosity because you deserve to have that. And you also deserve to have answers to the things you're curious about. It's just to me, that is way more loving than buying someone a car on their 16th birthday or saying, I love you every day, or even a hug every day. I think that, of course, it's my languages, right? But that feels so loving to me. And it's the most unassuming loving action because there is no physical touch or money being spent. It's just like, I respect your humanity and I'm going to treat you like a human, even though you're younger than I am. I'm not going to do the thing our culture is going to do to you. And I want to be that like respite I want to be the one person potentially, the one adult in your life who isn't going to treat you like some peon who doesn't know anything and needs to do what they're told.
Mm. Wow, this is such a beautiful I feel like gift that you're giving me right now, because I'm literally about to start a family. Like we're talking about, like doing this very soon. Probably by the time this episode comes out, maybe we'll be pregnant. Well, we're gonna have somebody else pregnant. But so I appreciate this so much, because it's like, you know, yeah, I'm thinking about learning how to be a good mom every day. And so, yeah, this is, I got like gooey feels just now. I would love, so I know that you actually recently put out a workbook, which I love, because I actually need physical paper and I have to write things down. And it's a wonder that I don't still have like an actual calendar notebook. I finally went digital like last year. But for Speaking from the Heart, you have created a workbook. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. Yeah, it's really it's coming out in print shortly, and it is available as a fillable PDF. So I know some people are just like purely digital. I totally get it. So you can get that now if that's a thing for you. But it's just like taking the idea or the concepts of expansive platonic love and what that could mean to you. And instead of just having to like read a little bit and see examples, there's actual like tangible, oh, hold it up, like exercises. It's going to be like mirrored, but of like questions and things to fill out and like quotes that matter and all this stuff. And so by the end, by the time you get to the final pages, like each exercise is going to help you get closer to which of those 18 might resonate with you the most and in which contexts, because the other reality is like not only will you be more than one love language, they're going to be different in every context depending on who the person is and what they mean to you, and if are they a coworker or are you related to them by blood. Like it's just going to really run the gamut. So because that's overwhelming and inconvenient, these worksheets and little exercises are kind of designed to like create a path toward that, so that you can kind of feel grounded and anchored the whole way and also supported. Like there's example answers for some of the questions so you can kind of see like what an answer could look like, so you're not totally on your own. And there's even a coupon for a discount to work with me if by the end of the workbook you're like, holy shit, you can book an hour session, and I think it's like 15% off or something. But like it really, the whole thing to the very end is very intentional around helping you bring your own inner knowledge and wisdom out of you. And the more you remove the little like rules that aren't even yours, they were imposed really. Every time you remove a rule, it's like there's way more room to breathe. And by the end, all the stuff you actually know about yourself that's been pushed down by everyone else's bullshit and your own bullshit as a result, like gets to come up and then out. And it can be very it's a weird thing maybe if you're not used to that, and it can maybe feel scary. But anyway, the workbook is supposed to be that tool where it's like, this feels overwhelming or I don't know where I'm going with it. It's just like I'm going to hold on to the workbook and like I'm going to just finish the next page, or I'm going to just do the next exercise regardless and see where that takes me.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Thank you. I think we need so many more workbooks on things like this and not the things that we have to spend a lot of time in school learning that really don't matter. Imagine if like we shared this with, our kids growing up. This is awesome. Thank you so much, Anne. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up, or any last things that, you feel people on this journey might benefit from knowing?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing that comes to mind, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but like I do want people to know, if they are feeling inspired and they want to like learn some facilitation skills and some information, they can go to everyonedeservessexed.com. There's a certification. There's also some recorded master classes that kind of give a deeper dive into things. And they're 3 times a year. So like that's always an option for people. And also just the reality of like Instagram and TikTok. Obviously there's a lot of like, smelly garbage on those platforms, but there's also a lot of really great content that's just free or at least open access if you have the internet and a device to look at it on. And so I do also encourage people and or remind them, like, you don't have to spend money necessarily to get started. And just, if you find an educator that you trust, follow them, yeah, but then also see the recommendations that are like them, and just see like who else might be kind of good to add to your feed. And that's also a great way to start, regardless of whether you sign up for a training or buy a book.
Yeah, I love that, because you're right. There's so much good content out there. And I'll speak to this for just a moment, because I recently had my first experience getting banned. And it lasted like a week.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I've been initiated, actually. It was like right around exactly almost our 1 year mark. And I never talked about any of this stuff. I was very private, actually. Most of my listeners, or if you've been a listener, you know this, but super private about my life and non-monogamy for a very long time, just because of my own shame and things that I hadn't worked through yet. And so once I started Open Late, it was like this floodgate for me. And so I'm new to all of this, like sharing online about these things and talking about these concepts. And I'm like relearning them for myself. And so it was around our 1 year mark exactly that we got banned for a week, and then reinstated with like no explanation.
Wow.
But I'll just say, to add to your point, when you find your educators, guys, not only follow, but like turn on the notifications, and do your best to engage with the content. And this is not just because we want more likes and follows, but it's because literally you won't see our stuff unless you're engaging with it, because it will get hidden and shadow banned and all of the things. So really just take that extra moment, that extra step to like comment, share, engage, like ask questions. I mean, I know I've seen you like respond to everybody.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is amazing. Not everybody can, because there's a lot of people who, don't have the time, or like it's not their main thing, and you're not making money from their platform. So we can't expect everyone to do that. But like I do in the meantime, I know you do. So don't hesitate to like reach out and do that, because it really helps us stay like on the platform for the most part. Yeah. I mean, until we do, another wrong thing or forget to put a space in the word sex. But we won't go there. Anyway, I just felt like it was important to share that, to support this work, and all the other people that are doing amazing work like this. So I appreciate you so much and your time, and I can't wait to get the workbook.
I can't wait to hear what you think.
Yeah, thanks again. All right, guys, this has been another amazing episode of Open Late. It's always a pleasure to bring on these amazing guests that I have, access to now that I'm doing a podcast, which is wild to me, because a lot of times I'm interviewing people that I've been fangirling for a while. As always, don't forget to subscribe to the show and follow us on Instagram, because we do share a lot of fun, educational, funny content sometimes. And I will see you next week with another episode.